Hello everyone, viewers, teachers and my dear friends. In this video, I'll be explaining my project graduation site of academic year 2021 to 2022. Before that, this activity of making sites started last year. So if you want to check the last year's site, you can click this button to do so. But coming to this year's site, this year we had very mixed experiences. We had online, offline and hybrid model classes. It was privileged to be part of the 20th anniversary of the school celebration. So this is a button which will take you to the index of this academic year site, where you can find all the pages. So let us go in order. First comes activities done. This year we have done a number of activities, but two of my favorite was circle time and art integration. Circle time. Our whole class was divided into groups of 5 and were given each day of each week activities done. This year we did a number of activities, but top two of my favorite was circle time and art integration. Circle time. Our whole class was divided into groups of 5 and each day of each week, one group took the initiative to conduct the assembly. And then comes art integration. It was basically to find out ways to include or imbibe the hobbies or art skills we have according to the task. So you can in this page you can find all the activities we did in art integration this academic year. First comes chemistry art vacation task, in which I made a Python program related to elements when you enter an atomic number, atomic symbol or an atomic name, it gives the full information about the atom. And then comes the social Christmas vacation task, in which we had to choose images from our textbook and then choose an Indian ancient painting style and then do a painting, which I did on the wall. And then comes Haryana art integration, which was given by the CBSE board, in which math we have researched and made a PPT on cultivation. In the social, we did it on sports of Haryana and sandalwood carving. And then in physics, we did it on War of Mahabharata. And then English, we have done it on art and we have did a brochure on art and architecture of Haryana. हिंदी में हमने हरियाणवी भाषा के बारे में लिखा है. And then comes leadership classes. In leadership classes, we learned a lot of live lessons, but top 3 my favorite were handling a failure. We saw a video by Sir APJ Abdul Kalam in which he tells about how his team leader during the mission Mangal took the blame on himself when the mission failed or when there was an error, but he gave the success credit to all of his team when it was a successful mission. And then the career guidance project. All the students of 9th and 11th grade were divided into groups and given a specific study destinations, subject or industry to research on, and how we can pursue a career or how we can go there and pursue our studies. So my group got the topic of physics subject. So here's a video link where you can find the presentation. And then we learned about how to overcome the inner critic, or how exactly we can remove the judgmental statements we make on ourselves. English, LSRW skills. Here I've written how I improved my listening, speaking, reading and writing skills. Listening by listening to the lessons and paying attention to them and understanding them well. Speaking, speaker at Silver Oaks, and by presenting the art integration projects in front of the class. Reading by reading the storybooks, novels or textbooks given by the school. Writing skills by learning and practicing new writing styles, as well as learning new grammar elements which improve the level of writing. And then here I've written about the interesting prose or an interesting lesson which I learned this year, which taught a lesson that we should be happy with whatever we have or get. And then grammar. In grammar this year, we mainly focused on prepositions and active and passive voice. And then comes second language, Hindi. हिंदी. यहाँ मैंने कैसे इस साल अपनी सुनने, बोलने, पढ़ने और लिखने के कौशल को सुधार किया, वह लिखा है. सुनने का कौशल. मैंने मेरे सुनने का कौशल अध्यापक को पाठ पढ़ाते वक्त सुनकर और पाठ को समझकर किया है. बोलने का कौशल जब मैंने बोलने का कौशल आर्ट इंटीग्रेशन प्रोजेक्ट पूरे कक्षा के सामने प्रस्तुत करते वक्त किया है। पढ़ने का कौशल स्कूल द्वारा दी गई कहानियाँ और पुस्तकों को पढ़कर। लेखन कौशल इस साल हमने 3 लेखन कौशल सीखे हैं, जो है संदेश लेखन, अनुच्छेद लेखन और पत्र लेखन। लेखन कौशल के उदाहरण के लिए मैंने एक संदेश लेखन का चित्र जो मैंने लिखा है उसका लगाया हुआ है। उसके बाद आती है मेरे पसंदीदा कहानियाँ और उनके नैतिकता। मैंने हरिहर काका, चतुरबाई और कबीर के दोहे से मेरे सीख को लिखा है। मुझे यह तीन पाठ पसंद है क्योंकि यह जीवन के सूत्रों के बारे में बताते हैं। Then comes mathematics. In mathematics, I have divided into 5 subtopics: number system, algebra, geometry, mensuration, and statistics. Number system. This in this chapter we learned the difference between a rational number, irrational number, and what are real numbers. And then we learned how we can mark any number, whether it's a rational or an irrational number, on number line, with which we did an activity of creating a spiral-like figure. So this is the image of that figure. And then we learned the laws of decimal expansion. We learned that when the decimal is terminating, it's a rational number, and when it's non-terminating, though it's not terminating but repeating, that means the decimals have a pattern of pattern, then also it's a rational number. But when they have no logic or no pattern, then it's an irrational number. Then we learned a little about the laws of exponents. Then comes algebra. In algebra, I have chosen the chapter polynomials. Here I have written about the types of polynomials: monomial, binomial, trinomial, and then polynomial in one variable, which means that there is only one variable in the given expression. And then what is the zero of a polynomial, which is nothing but equating the whole equation into zero as RHS. And then we learned something new, which is factors of a polynomial. We learned how we can derive factors of a given expression or a polynomial. And then we had a recap session or a revision kind of session for the algebraic identities. We learned this in detail last year. If you want to check that exact page, you can click this button to do so. Then comes geometry. In geometry, I have chosen the chapter constructions. First, we have revised the construction of basic angles, which helped us in the next step, which is to constructing triangles with only certain information given. We learned it's 3 main types of construction of a triangle. First, we learned to construct a triangle when a side, an angle, and then the sum of other 2 sides is given. The second type is when a side, an angle, and the difference of 2 sides is given. And then 2 angles and the sum of 3 sides is given. So this is one of the interesting chapters we did. And then comes mensuration. So I have written this small summary kind of thing. This is basically a self-explanatory chapter. So we've mainly focused on lateral surface area, curved surface area, total surface area, and volume of a 3D shape. And then have written the formulas which we learned in this chapter about the 3D shapes. Then comes statistics. In statistics, we learned about collecting data and representing data. In representing data, we mainly focused on bar graph, histogram, and line graph. I have written a small description about them. And then means of central tendency, mean, which is the average or sum of observations by the total number of observations. And then mean, which is the middlemost observation when arranged in ascending order. And the mode, which is the most occurring observation. Science. In science, we learned about the 3 main branches: physics, chemistry, and biology. Physics. In physics, I have chosen 2 chapters: motion and gravity. Motion. Here I have written what is the exact science definition of motion, then represent about how we can represent a motion on a straight line, the difference between uniform and non-uniform motion, and my learnings. In this chapter, we learned new formulas and derivations. Here I've written about this difference between speed and velocity. Speed is nothing but distance by time. Velocity is nothing but the displacement by time. Then graphical representation of motion. We learned how we can represent a motion of a given object, taking x-axis as time and y-axis as distance. So this was one of the interesting activity kind of thing which we did in this chapter. Then comes derivations. We learned how to derive these three equations, which is v is equals to u plus at, s is equals to ut plus half at square, 2as is equals to v square minus u square. V is nothing but the initial velocity. V is nothing but the final velocity. U is initial velocity. A is acceleration. T is time. S is speed. Yeah. And then we learned about the uniform circular motion when an object moves and the velocity of the object changes every time. It is known as the uniform circular motion. And then we learned about gravitation. In gravitation, I have written here first. I have written about the calculation. What is capital G, and then what is free fall. So in this free fall, we learned about the force or the speed the Earth pulls us towards the core. So we learned that the acceleration is 9.8 meter per second, and then here I've written the difference between mass and weight, and then how we can calculate an object's weight on moon. We learned how to calculate it. So we learned that the object will weigh 1/6 on moon compared to Earth. Then we learned about thrust and pressure, and then buoyancy force, which is nothing but why an object sinks or floats. Archimedes principle. Archimedes, a scientist, we learned how he uses buoyancy theory to find out the density of an object, in which he came up with relative density, which is nothing but the comparison of the density of an object with density of water. Then in chemistry, I have chosen two chapters: pure matter and atoms and molecules. Pure matter. Here I have written a tabular form of the differentiation of matter. Matter can be defined in two ways: pure matter and impure matter. In this chapter, we learned about mixtures. Here I have written the definition of pure matter. Then the two types of pure matter: elements and compounds. Element is nothing but which are made up of only one kind of atom. Compound is nothing but which are made up of two or more kind of atoms, but in a fixed ratio. So examples of element is hydrogen, and for compound it's salt and water. And then we learned about impure substance, or to be specific, mixtures. The two types of mixtures: homogeneous and heterogeneous. Homogeneous are mixtures that cannot be differentiated with a naked eye, but heterogeneous are the mixtures which we can differentiate with the naked eye. And we learned about solutions. There are three types of solutions, which is true solutions, suspension, and colloidals. And we learned about this interesting scattering effect of scattering of light, which is scattering of light through colloidal solution, which is known as Tyndall effect. And then we had a revision kind of session for the separation techniques. Atoms and molecules. In this chapter, we learned a lot of new things, which actually were very interesting and blew my mind. First, we learned about the laws of chemical combination. First law is that the law of conservation of mass. We learned that in a chemical reaction, the mass neither can be created nor can be destroyed. And then the law of constant proportion. We learned that in any chemical substance, the elements are present in fixed proportion by mass. And then here I've written about the atomic number and atomic mass, the definition of them. And then how do atoms exist, and about molecules and ions. Ions are nothing but when an atom has more or less electrons than the number of protons, or basically when the atom loses or gains electron, it is an ion, it becomes an ion. There are two types of ion: cation and anion, depending on whether the atom leaves or gains electron. When an atom gains electron or is negatively charged, it is known as an anion. And when an atom loses an electron or is positively charged, it is known as a cation. And then we learned how to write a chemical formula. And then in a formula, for example, H2O, the water formula, why H is written at the first and O at the end. Then we learned about molar mass and concluded with the chapter with learning molar mass and the mole concept. And then comes the next biology. In biology, I have to choose the two chapters: fundamental unit of life and tissues. Fundamental unit of life. First, here I have written about the story of how a cell was discovered while Robert Hooke was researching on a bark of a tree. And then we saw these two cells, onion peel cell and cheek cell. As we couldn't go to school, we did this activity online by using a website. And then these are the three observations which I came across while doing the experiment. And then we learned about the structure of an atom. We learned that the structure depends on the function and the placement of the cell. And then what are unicellular organisms and multicellular organisms? Unicellular, here I've written about the unicellular and multicellular organisms. Unicellular organisms are the organisms which only have one cell, which is enough to perform all the tasks required for the survival. Multicellular are organisms which have more than one cell. Main and unique parts of a cell. We learned about uh, many new organelles, cell organelles. First comes the plasma membrane or the cell membrane, which is the protective layer of a cell, and which allows an exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen and water. Then we learned about the main and unique parts of a cell. First is plasma membrane, then the types of diffusion: hypotonic, isotonic, hypotonic, depending on the water content outside of the cell, how the cell swells or stays the same or shrinks in the size. And then here I've written about the cell wall, which is basically an additional protective layer for a plant, which is only present in a plant cell. Then the nucleus is nothing but like the brain of a cell. Then the cytoplasm. And then we learned about the important cell organelles, which are endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus, lysosomes, mitochondria, plastids, vacuoles. And then we finally learned about cell division and concluded the chapter. Then comes the tissues chapter, in which we learned about plant tissues. The first type is mesosomatic tissues, and then permanent tissues. In permanent tissues, there are two types: simple permanent tissue and complex permanent tissue. And then we learned about animal tissue. We learned about first we learned about epithelial tissue, which is nothing but the skin. Then we learned about the four types: squamous, stratified squamous, cuboidal, and columnar. And then we learned about the connective tissues, the five main connective tissues. Blood. We this year this In this chapter we came to know interesting fact, which is blood is also a connective tissue. Then bone, ligaments and tendons, cartilages and alveolar tissues. And then in muscular tissues, we learned about three types: stratified and cardiac. Their structure is dependent also on where they are present in. And then we learned nervous tissues, and we learned that they're the fastest working cells in our body. And then here I have written about the integrated course chapters. That means the 10th grade chapters which we learned in this academic year. Here I have written about physics, chemistry. In physics, I have written about sources of energy, and in chemistry, periodic classification of elements. And then in biology, I have written about our environment and the sustainable management of natural resources. So here is the page. And then next subject, social. Social, I have divided into 6 topics: production, political parties, development, history, democratic rights and drainages. These are the 6 chapters I chose. Production. Here I have written the basic requirements for to produce goods and services. And then we learned that the first requirement is land. And while researching on land, we learned about the modern farming techniques, hydroponics and aquaponics. And then about the second requirement is labor, and the third requirement is capital. And then we learned the story of village Udanturi, in which we learned about this a man R. Shanmugam, who made the village like a modern village. So this was an interesting story. Then comes political parties. Here, first I've written the definition of political party. So political party is nothing but a group of people who contest in elections to hold the power in the government, and then the first they offer different programs that they'll fulfill once they win the most support in the elections. Then how a political party works, how many parties are required. So we learned that there is no limit for how many political parties. This was a debatable topic in the class. We learned that there is no limit for how many political parties can contest in a particular region or a particular election. So we learned that the more than 750 parties are registered in the Election Commission of India. So these are the different type of party systems. One party system, two party system, and multi party system. As the first one party system, as the name states, there is only one. There is only one party which can hold the power in the government. Two parties is nothing but there are two major parties which can only hold the power in the government, and multi-party system. Example India, how there is no limit for how many political parties, or everyone has an equal a fair chance of winning and losing. And then here I've written about national party. What's a national party is when a party acquires 6% of the total votes in elections of Lok Sabha, at least contest in 4 states and win 4 seats in the Lok Sabha, it is recognized as a national party. So we have learnt about some of the interesting, some of the well-known national parties. BJP, Bharatiya Janata Party, BSP, Bahujan Samaj Party, Communist Party of India, Indian National Congress, All India Trinamool Congress, and then we learned about what are regional parties or state parties, and then the challenges faced by political parties. When comes development, first I've written the definition of development, and then what are the developmental goals of other people. So we learn in this chapter we learned that not money is not only the goal, individual goal for becoming developed. There are other criteria like security and freedom. Yeah, and then we learned about national development and how our countries compared on basis of development. The main factor is per capita income, which is the average income of a area, and then these are some of the other criteria of comparison. And then we learned what is sustainable development. We learned that we should go in a developmental pace that the future generations can also cope up to, so that yeah, so that we have a sustainable development history. The chapter started with a suspense story of a boy whose name was Helmet. And then to understand this, first we learned to understand the chapter better. We learned the reasons of World War One mania, and then the alliances of when the World War One happened, and then how did the World War One start, the birth of Weimar Republic, and the effects of war on Germany, the economic crisis, because when the Germany printed currency recklessly to pay off the compensation, the value of German mark fell. Eventually, America helped Germany get out of the crisis. But when here I've written the effects of Great Depression, the crash of Wall Street Exchange on Germany, and then how did Hitler, from a messenger in an army, become the chancellor of a country. So this is his journey, and then what were his ideologies, how he eliminated Jews, and why did he hate Jews, and then how the youth of Germany was treated or motivated to choose war against peace, and then finally Hitler was dead. Uh, Finally, during World War II, Hitler was found dead in his bunker. By the end of the chapter, we came to know this interesting fact. Hitler never wanted to join army. He wanted to become an artist. He applied in a university for 2 times and got rejected 2 times. So then due to the he joined army then he joined army while the World War One was going on. So we know the who the actual culprit of the war is. Then comes democratic rights. Though this is a small but an informative chapter, I have written about the definition of democratic rights. Why do we need democratic rights? Six fundamental rights: the right to equality, right to freedom, right against exploitation, right to freedom of religion, cultural and educational rights, right to constitutional remedies. And then um, here I have written in detail about each right. And then we had a pondering question. So we had a debate. We had a debate on this question whether the rights can be improved or added, or so finally we came to conclusion that there is a lot of scope to do so. Then comes the chapter drainages. First, when I heard the name of this chapter, our whole class was like, "Are we going to really learn about the drainages?" Then we came to know that the drainages in a country level means the river system. Here I have written the two types of rivers: Himalayan rivers and peninsular rivers. Himalayan rivers are the rivers that originate from glaciers or the ice from Himalayas. Peninsular rivers are basically the seasonal rivers which mainly are based on the rain. And then here I've written about one Himalayan river and one peninsular river, Ganga and Krishna. ICT. We learned about Python, the programming language, in which I have developed a bot. You can click this image to go to the page and you can run it online. So it is basically an interactive bot. You can just click help as your first input, and you can know what all it can do. And then you can contact me at my mail too if you wanna do any changes, if you wanna know how it runs. I'll be uploading a video on this one and the chemistry art integration with chemistry integration task in my YouTube. So if you want to know how this program works, you can subscribe and follow my channel. And then Thanksgiving for this side. Throughout this academic year, I thank my parents who were supportive, who were backbone of me and supported me every time, and teachers and heads for teaching and giving wonderful opportunities like this one. Thank you, friends, for supporting and helping me whenever needed or asked. Classmates for actively participating. NCRT for providing content for the textbook. Google for clarifying my doubts and providing content of the parts which I wasn't clear of. Google Images to provide most of the images in the site. Hindi typer, as I had to present Hindi subject in Hindi. I had used a Hindi typer and translate. Thank you, translator, because few parts I wasn't able to type. I used a translator to do so, and then mainly copy paste. So I have made this class photo um, for this academic year, and then skills are improved in this academic year and throughout the presentation. So I have written that here, and then here's the feedback form which you can fill and give the feedback for the site. So I hope you like my presentation. Thank you.